This is a video that's going to show you how to change the DC connector on the Korg Volca series. So this is a Korg Volca keys. I've already changed the DC connector. This DC connector is a 2.1 millimeter size, which is more of a standard size than the one that comes with the original Korg, which is a 1.7 mil. It's harder to find a power supply for that size, so I decided to change it over to a 2.1. This is what it looks like on the inside of the Korg Volca keys. You can see the DC jack there and some wires going down, and those wires are soldered in to these 3 pins here, which is where the original surface mount DC jack would have gone. And it's a bit chunkier on this one. It obscures some of the writing, but that's the price I'm going to pay. So I'm going to show you how to do that on the Volca Beats. Just before we get into it, because space is pretty tight in here, I just want to show you that the jack that I've got from bottom of the mounting surface down to the pins is about 13.5 millimeters. But as you can see, I've actually trimmed those down on this one. Okay, first you're going to want to pull off any knobs that are in the way of removing the faceplate. So on the Beats, it's these two. On your Korg Volca, it might be something else, but just anything that is going to prevent you from lifting off the faceplate. And then flip the Korg Volca over and remove the battery cover. Okay, so you're going to want to remove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the big screws and 1, 2, 3, 4 of the little screws. Okay, now that you've taken those screws out, the back should just come off. And because you've undone these 4 screws, the battery holder can flip to the side. And the only thing that's kind of making it awkward to separate these two parts is the speaker wire. And you can just untuck the wire from this little holder here, and that'll give you some more slack to flip the base to the side. Okay, here we have the back of the Volca with the battery holder on one side, free to move. And now that the speaker wire has been released, that's free to go to the side, and we've got good access to the back of the Volca. Now, as you can see, this is the DC input jack just here. And if we flip this over, you can see that that DC input jack is soldered on with these 3 connections here, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to have to release this top circuit board to be able to desolder these 3 connections and pull the jack off. So to release this top circuit board, we're going to have to remove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 screws. Okay, now we've released these 7 screws, we can gently pry off the top of the circuit board. You could undo this connector if you wanted a bit more freedom, I'm not going to bother. And that gives us access to the DC jack here and the 3 pins on the underside. So now I'm going to desolder these 3 pins and pry off this DC jack here. Now, just before we start pulling this off, I just want to find out which parts of the DC jack are connected to which pins on the back. So I'm just going to test for continuity. The tip in the middle is connected to this pin here. One of the other legs will be negative, and one of the other legs will be the switch that tells the Volca to disconnect from the batteries when the power supply is plugged in. So this leg here is positive, and the other 2 are negative. I'll clarify that later. So to desolder these legs, I've got 2 devices here. One's just a solder sucker, and one is spring-loaded. You just use whatever you've got. I'm going to use this one. So I'm going to heat up a bit of solder. Apply that hot solder to the leg that I want to remove, and then get the sucker close in and suck it up. Now, it's very rare that you'll remove all the solder in one go and just be able to pull the jack out. Usually it's stuck in place and you have to heat the solder and put some pressure on it, one leg at a time. So there it is. I've actually destroyed it somewhat and left one of the legs in there, but that's okay. At least it's out. And now I can remove this leg here that's stuck with some pliers. So the DC jack I've got actually fits through the current hole fine, but on the underside there are these little ridges here which stops it from sitting square and flush, so I'm going to have to use a blade to remove these ridges either side so that this will sit nicely. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. It's sitting square. Once I put the nut on, that should lock it in place. So I've got this plastic washer here, which is from like a 19-inch rack mount. The hole was too small, so I had to drill it out a little bit, and now my DC jack screws into it. So for the size of my DC jack, it was really important that it sit as far down as possible so that the threads were as far up as possible. Turns out the blade scraping away the ridge there wasn't enough to get that plastic ridge away. I ended up using a burring bit to just grind away some of that plastic ridge, and now my DC jack fits flush against the back, so that's all tight in place now. And because space is really at a premium here, you can see that the circuit board won't actually fit in place with the full legs of my DC jack. Your DC jack may have shorter legs. I'm going to have to trim these legs down so that the circuit board fits and screws into place. Let's see if this fits now. Yep, that's good. There's a bit of a gap there. So this is where you can set the polarity of the power supply that will make your Volca work. I'm going to stick with positive tip. That's the more common polarity. Positive tip, negative ring, negative outside. Boss pedals and guitar pedals tend to do the opposite. They have a negative tip, but I'm going to stick with the original. So I'm just going to make certain which terminal on the back is connected to the tip using a continuity on my multimeter. Okay, so the tip on my power supply, my DC jack connects to this terminal here. So because I want my tip, my center to be positive, as the diagram says, my tip is connected to this leg, and I know that on the circuit board this terminal here was positive in the original, so the circuit board is expecting to see positive at this soldering point here, so I'm going to connect this soldering point to the positive leg on my jack. Okay, because we're dealing with pretty low current in the tens of milliamps, I'd imagine I'm using quite thin wire. That's also because there's going to be not much space here. This needs to be really flexible to get between the DC jack and the circuit board. So I've just tinned either side of this wire, and now I'm going to tin the legs of this jack here. Okay, after confirming that this leg of my DC jack indeed is connected to the tip on the other side, I'm going to solder on the red wire, and I'm going to try and keep everything horizontal and not vertical because of space issues when it all goes together. And the other two terminals get black wires, one for the negative and one for the switch that turns off the batteries. Again, keeping things as low profile as possible. And then we just line up the wires into the correct terminals on the circuit board so that the positive is here on the top and the other two are the negative. I'm going to assume it doesn't matter which one is explicitly negative of the power supply and which one switches the battery holder off. I'll let you know if it doesn't work when I plug it all back together. So I'm just going to fill in these solder pads here now. And I'm just going to trim off the excess wire that's hanging out the top. Okay, time to plug in a 9-volt DC power supply with a positive tip, positive center, and a negative ring, negative outside. Now, because we're cramming a bunch more wires into a small space, you've got to tuck everything to the side. This here is where the button pushes, so you don't want wires getting trapped in between there, and this screw housing also needs to be clear, so you just got to tuck all the wires away. Let's plug this in. Be ready to pull it out quickly in case it doesn't turn on. You've got something mixed up. And we're looking for some lights. There we go. That's with a 2.1 DC jack. So now that everything is working, I'm going to button this thing up and show you that it's working fine. So when you're buttoning this back up again, just make sure that these locating tabs on the battery cover, that they're fitted in correctly. They should be on top of the main cover, not underneath. And there shouldn't be too much tension on these screws. They should slide in easily if these locating tabs are correctly in place. Okay, everything's buttoned up. Power supply in, turns on. If I take the power supply out, it stays on because the batteries are plugged in. So it works on both batteries and power supply. Now the power supply is plugged in, if I take the battery out, it's still on. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was of some use to you, and good luck in your Volca modification to change the 1.7mm jack into a common 2.1mm jack.